Chris, welcome to Podcastina.
Thanks. Appreciate you having me.
Of course, can you remember what it is that got you into firefighting?
Um, I wanted to be a firefighter when I was a kid, like a lot of people. My grandpa was a firefighter. So there was always that kind of in the back of my head. But yeah, wanted to get out west, grew up in Ohio, wanted to get out west and explore, and it was kind of my avenue. Initially got into trail work, working with a nonprofit, working with different federal agencies in conjunction with nonprofits. That ultimately led me to fire. And yeah, started in California, was there for a few years, have always been a federal wildland firefighter. Um, yeah, bounced between Colorado and California. And yeah, with that, I've gone all over the country from, yeah, Alaska, Montana, New Mexico, Virginia, Minnesota. Yeah, just all over the place. We go everywhere to fight fire when we're needed.
So, if someone doesn't know what a wildland firefighter is, can you just define what the difference is between that and the more familiar municipal firefighting?
Sure. Primarily, it's that we deal with fires that are on, federal wildland firefighters, there's a difference. There's contract crews that do state work too. But yeah, as far as just being a wildland firefighter, it's fighting fires in either forest or desert. Um, yeah, we're not responding to structures being on fire specifically. If that happens, then we can kind of be roped into things like we saw in LA, where you have that wildland urban interface zone where there's forest burning and homes burning that has come together. And then we all work together, municipal firefighters and wildland firefighters. But yeah, it's primarily out in public lands. So whether that's state, city, or federal public lands, that's where we fight fire.
Can you tell me about some of the physical requirements to get hired?
Sure. Yeah, there's a pretty basic standard across the board. It can be different depending on the type of crew you're applying for. But the PAC test, work capacity test, is something that every wildland firefighter has to do every year, federal that is. And that's hiking or walking rather. You do 3 miles in 45 minutes with 45 pounds on your back with a weight vest or a pack. Um, but yeah, again, if you're getting into specific crews, you have to do a certain amount of push ups, sit ups, pull ups. You have to be able to run a mile in a certain amount of time. Yeah, it just kind of depends on what kind of crew you're looking to get on to.
Good to know, because I always think about that. I've seen videos of the tests and those crazy ladder climbs and whatnot,
Yeah,
but as a
we're not doing
person,
that.
oh,
We
you're
don't do
not doing that.
ladders. No, that's a structure thing for sure. No, we go hike out in the woods, and yeah, it's a little different, but yeah, it's still pretty strenuous.
Yeah, it still sounds like something that, especially if you're being tested every year, which I wasn't familiar with the frequency
Yeah,
of it, that's good. That means it's almost like your version of continued education where they want to
yeah,
make sure that you're up for the gig every single time.
totally. Yeah.
So, what are the biggest risks that you face when you're on an active fire?
Um, Man, that's a loaded question. That's kind of an opinion depending on who you are and what your experiences are in fire, but communication, I would say, is the biggest issue that we have on a lot of fires as far as when any kind of injuries or fatalities or yeah anything negative happens out on fires, it typically usually comes back to a breakdown in communication in some way. So yeah, I could say the obvious answer that is the fire itself. It's trees falling, helicopters, aircraft flying around, dropping things out of the sky as we're working. There's all kinds of things that are an inherent risk that we call an accepted risk that's part of the job. Um, but yeah, just we're out in remote places, so we typically don't have cell service, even radio service is never guaranteed when we go out to a fire. So just trying to figure out how we're communicating with each other, with other crews that are coming in to help, with aircraft. yeah, deal with communication issues pretty regularly.
I saw a video of a ground crew that I guess was working on what I now understand to be like the containment line. And in the video, the airplanes that were doing the water drops were right above them. Is that normal?
Yeah, it can be. Um, it's a pretty common practice to stay out of the way of aircraft and be in communication with aircraft so that when they're doing water drops, bucket drops, retardant, whatever they're working on, you have direct communication. Somebody on the ground should always have direct communication with them so that they're not dropping literally on top of you, because that does happen. When you have bad communication or it's in the beginning stages of the fire, the initial attack, you don't know, you just don't know what to expect when you roll up to a new fire. So yeah, it's trying to get all those things set up and in motion um, before aircraft gets there, and then yeah, hopefully you do have communication with them and you're not directly under them while they're working.
What do you remember about the first fire you worked on?
It was a very small fire in Big Sur. Worked on the coast for a couple seasons, and yeah, very low threat. But my job was to take the hose out to the fire to supply water to the fire when everyone else was grabbing tools, and we all had our own specific jobs going out to this small fire. And yeah, got my gear and I ran out to the fire and I didn't have the hose. That's what I remember. I left the water at the truck, so luckily it was only like 50 yards away from the truck, so it wasn't a big deal. But yeah, I forgot the one thing that I needed, which was water. So
What's been the biggest fire you've been sent out to?
biggest as far as like acreage.
Sure. Or
Uh,
intensity, I guess.
yeah, that's it all kind of depends. I've been on so many. I've been on a 400,000 plus acre fire in Oregon.
Oh,
But by the time we got there, it was almost out because it was primarily a grass fire. So grass fires burn extremely fast. They're wind driven. So they burn, yeah, they can burn a couple 100,000 acres in a day or two. Um, and that wasn't really that intense. By the time we got there, like I said, it was about out. But yeah, I mean, working in California, I think being in the urban interface zone a lot more regularly in California, those were always pretty intense. Just because you're dealing with public citizens on top of everything else we have going on in our world with a fire, talking about communicating with all these different other crews and aircraft. And then you have homeowners coming up trying to get information out of you. You're running two different radios. There's just so much going on. And then you have this fully separate part of the job that is dealing with people. You're trying to do your job, and then you have, yeah, just people coming from you at all directions. So we don't deal with that as much where I am here in Colorado, but we still do. Just this past year, we've had some more urban interface fires than we normally do. So yeah, just yeah, there's a lot of complexities of the job, but people are one of the big ones. That includes us too.
of
Human
course.
dynamics are some of the hardest parts of the job for sure.
Do you get instruction from officers to not tell citizens what's going on, or what does that look like?
Um, it's different every time, really, when we roll up to a fire. Um, if we're in our community here and we know people and we know if we're, I guess, yeah, if it's the time and place and we have a few minutes to educate people, then we'll let people know what we can. But it ultimately is usually up to our discretion. We're the experts, we're the ones that know what's going on and what's best. So we're not going to give people misleading information. If we don't know, we're not going to give someone, hopeful, promising information to try to say, oh, your house is going to be fine. We're going to save your house. We're not in a position to say that because fire's unpredictable, weather's unpredictable. So yeah, we have the freedom, the discretion to tell people what's appropriate, I guess.
Since you're under federal jurisdiction, what kinds of bureaucracy are you running into, and how does it make your job harder?
Um, yeah, this is kind of a sticky topic at the moment, I
Hmm.
guess, which I won't dive fully into. Yeah, as a federal employee right now, we're dealing with a lot of uncertainty with everything happening in the country. So I guess at this point, I'm trying to stay optimistic with things. I guess the biggest issue for us currently is the federal hiring freeze. So we don't know if we're going to be able to hire our seasonal employees. And another employee that we've just recently hired, that's kind of in limbo. Um, we kind of assume that we won't be affected, but at the same time, we haven't gotten direction from anyone nationally saying that we're not going to be affected by the federal hiring freeze. I know military and postal service, some other folks have been, um, they've let them know that they shouldn't be affected, but federal wildland firefighters haven't been given any kind of information so far. So, um, yeah, just trying to advocate for that quite a bit right now. Like, we need this hiring freeze to, yeah, go away for us. We're coming into fire season very quickly. It's been unseasonably warm around here and around a lot of the West this winter. We're not getting much snow. So, yeah, that's what we're looking at. Like, we need to be at full capacity. Our workforce is already dwindled significantly in the past few years for lots of different reasons, but having a hiring freeze on top of it is a very bad situation.
This is a bit of a tangent, but what is considered fire season? Because I don't think I know officially.
Sure. Yeah, and you'll hear a lot these days. People are calling it a fire year instead of a fire season because we do just have fires that happen year round regionally, whether it's California, Colorado, New Jersey. There are fires happening outside of the normal window of when regional fire seasons usually are. But um, historically, fire season has been roughly between April and October from the Southwest. They start getting fires in April, May in the Southwest, or we do. Um, and then California starts to come in a little later, June, July, August. So yeah, June, July, August are typically like the busiest months across the entire West as far as the most fires happening at the same time when resources are spread thin. You have people committed to fires all over the country. So yeah, this time of year, I mean, it's early, but I'm saying it's closer to fire season because yeah, looking outside right now, I don't know what the temperature is today. It's like 60. We haven't gotten snow in weeks at this point. Um, so yeah, fire season might be a little longer earlier this year, as it kind of seems to be every year.
Yeah, it feels that way here too, because I think it's unseasonable to have what we just had here in Los Angeles at the beginning of January, when typically that's kind of the one time of year when we have rain. But I hadn't even
Yeah,
realized it. I've lived here for 12 years, and when I moved here, it was uh, like a really intense drought for a long time. I thought it was normal because I grew up in Ohio too, and I was like,
yeah.
oh, it's just warm and sunny here in December. That's normal. And then to hear that we hadn't had rain since May prior to the fires, that hadn't even like occurred to me.
Yeah.
So I know it was more of a factor of the winds and everything, and that can kind of happen unseasonably as well. But from what I've heard here, yeah, the fire season is that keeps changing. It's like a fluid term that is
Totally.
always moving, and the goalpost is always moving because every year it's different.
Yeah.
So with the like those government shutdowns that people hear about. There's always some kind of scramble in the Senate, and there's always a threat of, oh, we're going to shut down the government, this, that, everybody's going to stop getting paid. Does that then also extend to emergency services?
So that's a little confusing. As federal employees, we are affected by that, but we're deemed, um, I don't know what the term is now. It was essential employees though. So first responders aren't affected. So we have to work during a shutdown. All federal employees don't work. They're not allowed to even be at the office, not allowed to use government equipment, computers, anything. But we, as firefighters, do have to work. So we're the only folks actually out there working. So as we're working, we're not getting paid during a shutdown. Um, it is written into law that we will retroactively get paid whenever the shutdown ends. But if that shutdown goes on for weeks or over a month, like it did a few years ago, yeah, that dramatically affects people's lives. Like not getting a paycheck for a month is that can ruin people. So yeah, it's a thing that yeah brings anxiety to people and their families yearly when we have all these shutdowns and continuing resolutions that just get bumped along 3 months, 4 months, 6 months at a time. And us, especially right now as federal firefighters, um, we got a 50% or $20,000 raise, whichever is less. We got that about 3 years ago through the bipartisan infrastructure law. And that's been continued through these continuing resolutions. But every time that there's a potential of government shutdown, there's always a chance that we lose that money. So at this point, it's people can't really go back. That raise that we got wasn't some huge amount of money. It just got us up to kind of a baseline of where firefighters are around the country. So yeah, just getting people up to a basic minimum wage, $15 an hour. So yeah, in March, we don't know if we're going to lose that money. We could all potentially be losing $20,000 a year come a month from now, March 14th. So
So many things are infuriating about what you said. Just even thinking
yeah,
that you're on, no matter what, you're not exempt from not working, which
no,
on the one hand, as an emergency service that's so critical, obviously we need you guys to work no matter what, but
sure.
how incredibly unfair that the shutdown extends not to your working hours, but to getting paid because
Yeah,
yeah, the majority of people in a job like that, especially hearing what some of the pay rates are, you can't go a month without a check.
no,
And you don't
can't.
even know that it's a month, right? It's
Yeah, yeah,
kind
you
of
don't know.
ambivalent how long these shutdowns last.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, everyone's a little more anxious coming into March this time, I think, because we just don't know. Like, is the government actually going to shut down this time? And what does that look like? Do we lose that money indefinitely? Like, it's, yeah, there's a lot of people that have been considering leaving for different reasons. And yeah, if we get shut down and lose that $20,000 retention pay bonus, yeah, we could see a dramatic reduction in our numbers. People just, yeah, leaving, going to work for the state, work for municipal fire crews that pay better wages.
So, can you tell me a little bit more about or not even a little bit more, but can you tell me about the Wildland Firefighter Paycheck Protection Act?
Sure. Um, yeah, what that is, without getting into all the details, it essentially gets us to a point where it comes close to making that retention pay permanent. So it's not exactly the same thing. It's not $20,000, but it's kind of a graduated scale of people in different GS levels, the government pay scale. It basically just gives everyone a raise to some degree to get us up to, again, a baseline wage that's comparable to the rest of the country. Um, and then, yeah, there's also a premium pay where we would get paid more money when we're out on fires away from home. So we get sent out, deployed on generally 14-day assignments throughout the year, throughout the summer when the fire danger is higher, when there's more of a need around the country. Um, so yeah, there would be a boost in pay. We're basically getting 24-hour pay for those 2 weeks. a lot of crews, municipal crews, state crews have something like that in place, and we just never have as federal firefighters. So yeah, basically, it's establishing a better living wage across the board, just as a baseline to, yeah, get us closer to firefighters around the country.
I was reading the bill a little bit and I saw that it would mean extended pay or higher pay for something that lasts over 36 hours, which just looking at what happened in LA, I mean, it took weeks to reach 100% containment. And in any other job, if you're working OT like that, you're going to be compensated. And I
Yeah.
saw another aspect of it was paying to house you guys, which we were seeing crews obviously from all sorts of states coming in to help.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, they were camping out at the Pasadena Rose Bowl. They
Yep.
were camping out in trailers in parking lots. And it just, I don't know, it feels like an egregious way to treat people that are putting in, like, that are actually risking their lives to help us.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a normal thing. If you talk to any firefighter who's been doing it for a couple of years, we've all slept in town parks, under playgrounds, and just all kinds of weird places because you show up and everything's just kind of chaos for the first day or first couple of days of a fire. So you find a place to sleep that's hopefully a little bit quiet and not full of lights and people. And yeah, you just tuck away wherever you can. Yeah, that's a huge part of, yeah, what we're advocating for is just, I mean, yeah, you can get into housing as a totally separate issue as well. But yeah, just, yeah, getting good places for people to sleep while they're fighting fire.
It feels insane and illogical that they wouldn't at least have some kind of like a hotel voucher or something like that. It's like you need to recoup. You can't just be sleeping on dirt. I mean, anyone in their 30s will tell you that if you sleep on the wrong kind of materials, you're going to
Uh,
be in pain the next day.
yeah. And there are times where hotels make sense, where we do have money to stay at hotels, but there's a lot of times, and quickly changing, evolving fires, you don't have time to go from public lands out to a forest. That can be justified by some people, some crews, but when you have to drive an hour and a half or 2 hours to get to a hotel, it just doesn't make sense. You need to be spending that time resting and sleeping, not driving to a hotel. So, yeah, there are times where we just have to camp, and that's part of the job. So, yeah.
Are you paid for training at the beginning?
Yeah. Yeah. So, for the most part, majority of our training is on the job. So that's paid. Like, yeah, I didn't know that when I first got into it. I thought I had to go to fire academy or had to go do something very specific on my own, but just talked to a handful of firefighters and they just all kind of laughed like, no, just show up and we'll train you. So yeah, your first year, if you're a rookie in any kind of crew and don't have any training, like it's preferred that you have some training, but you can also just show up and it's all given to you, whether by people on your crew or people on your district, forest, or if you're being sent to a separate academy. Yeah, we're always doing some kind of training.
Is there some kind of probationary period, or are you pretty much thrown to the wolves as soon as you're done with training?
Um, that's kind of a complex question or answer, I guess. You're kind of, I guess, you're thrown to the wolves on day one if you don't know what you're getting into, because a lot of times you're being trained by the people you're working with. So it's um, hopefully you've got people you're working with that are going to respect you and are looking out for you and are treating you in a way that, um, yeah, you're not just totally being inundated with all this new information and chaos, and you're not being treated in a way that you expect you should be. Um, yeah, I'll stop there on that one again. Right on a tangent.
And as the system is currently set up within federal wildland firefighting, are there a lot of opportunities to move up, to get promotions? Like, what's the highest you can go with it?
um, yeah, I mean, baseline, yeah, there's a lot you can do. Um, Typically, as a federal firefighter, through the years. Like when I started, permanent jobs were a lot harder to get compared to seasonal jobs. Everyone starts out as a seasonal is typically how it was. But in recent years, we've had so many people leave, resign, that there are huge amounts of vacancies now. So a lot of people can come straight into fire and get a job, have a lot more options to work in places that they want to work. Like typically, um, over the past 10 years, you have to move geographically. You have to go work in a different state on a different crew somewhere to move up, is typically how it's worked. So, yeah, if you do want to get a promotion, you can't stay in the town that you've lived your whole life, or you can't live where your family is. You have to pack up and move, kind of like the military to some degree, um, or to get the position or to get promotion that you really want, you got to move. But it's definitely changed in recent years where you don't have to go as far because there are just more vacancies, which isn't a good thing, but it can
Mhm.
be beneficial if you're trying to promote, I guess.
Do you think the primary driver of all of this employee turnover is having to do with the pay issues?
Yeah, it's a huge part of it, definitely. We've watched thousands of people leave the federal firefighting workforce in just the last few years, going to state agencies that are paying more. Um, yeah, that's definitely the main driving factor. I mean, there's other things too, just um, yeah, issues that we're trying to work on, advocate for, get better laws passed. But yeah, as far as housing, that's a huge one. I mean, that's for everybody in the country. Housing's an issue if you're not a millionaire. But yeah, just trying to get. I mean, there's government housing out there for some firefighters, but that seems to be going away more and more all the time. Finding money to keep those places maintained. Yeah,
You said they
lost my.
start at $15 an hour. Is that the starting wage?
Yeah, and that just became the new starting wage as of I think 2 years ago. And that was something that the Biden administration made happen. But yeah, before that, there were still people making $13 an hour. Guy started out making 13 an hour when I began. So, and yeah, my pay is like maybe $10 more than that now after 10 years of this. So, yeah,
Yeah,
still
that
not
part
great.
is mind-blowing because in so many states that $15 an hour is not a livable wage, like not even
No,
close.
not. And that's why, I mean, if you talk to any firefighter, you'll hear we have to get 1,000 hours overtime. We have to work a certain amount of hours of overtime every year to make ends meet. So, um, people that, yeah, pay attention to money and budgets, have families, you have to hit whatever that magic number is. And that's usually between 600 and 1,000 hours of overtime to be able to just, yeah, pay bills and buy groceries. It's not like this isn't money that, um, yeah, we need to go buy extra toys. It's just like, yeah, to live in. And a lot of the places that we live and work in too are really expensive spots to live in because we're in mountain towns, ski towns, we're out in these remote areas, but that also usually coincides with, yeah, really wealthy communities. So trying to figure out how to afford buying homes and, yeah, it's not realistic for a lot of people. But I don't know. We're stubborn. Firefighters are stubborn in general in a lot of different ways. So we love what we do. We love that we get to travel, that we get to be out in the woods most days. Yeah, we try to hang on to all the goodness and the reasons why we got into this in the first place. But yeah, again, it's gets to a point where people start having families, buy a house, you become an adult, start this job as a college student or right out of college or right out of high school. And it's just fun. It's the adventure, it's the adrenaline, it's everything. But a few years in, you realize, oh man, like, can I actually do this? Can I last more than a couple of years? people figure out pretty quickly if they're going to be in fire more than 1 or 2 years. You make it past 3, 4, 5 years, you're probably going to be in it for a while.
I just can't imagine anyone, like any taxpayer, having any kind of issue with allocating more money towards that when there's so much government waste, obviously, without getting political or
Sure.
like going there too much. It's like I'd be so happy knowing that more of my tax dollars are going to something like that. It's so pertinent. There's such a need, and it feels like the need is getting even deeper
Yeah.
every year. So, what is the holdup, like, in your opinion? Why is it so hard to get this legislation passed?
Um, that's hard to comment on without getting too political, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I went to DC this past summer, um, working with the union, National Federation of Federal Employees, advocating primarily for the WFPPA, the Paycheck Protection Act. Um, and it, at least, like, I'll say that it was positive to talk to so many representatives and their staffers in a short amount of time. I was there for a week, and we had, I don't know, 120, 150 meetings. I don't even know, between like 25 people, mostly firefighters running around halls of Congress. Um, but they actually listened. Like, we were focusing mainly on Republican representatives, because for the most part, Democrats are fully on board. They want to jump in and help and fund us. But Republicans don't want to spend money on a lot of things. I guess I'll stop there. I don't want to go much further, but yeah, we talked to a lot of Republican representatives, and they were all extremely supportive of us, of firefighters. So they were, signing on and giving us their support. Um, and I think truly a lot of it that surprised me when I was there was that they just didn't know. They didn't understand, I guess, how big the federal firefighting force actually is. And they didn't understand that we were getting paid $13 an hour until 2 years ago. So we have gotten the attention of a lot of representatives. And just as of a couple of weeks ago, we got the WFPPA reintroduced, by a bipartisan group of representatives. Um, so yeah, I guess to circle back, why doesn't it happen faster? Yeah, it's because it does have to be an act of Congress to make these things happen, because we're federal employees. It's not just a matter of one supervisor signing something off and saying, okay, we can give you guys more money. It has to go through the entire legal process of, yeah, Congress.
It just feels like such an obvious yes because saying yes to
Yeah.
that, it's an investment not just in you guys, but in our infrastructure. Like you're
Yeah.
protecting our infrastructure at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And that's a thing that, kind of big picture thing that I don't think a lot of people understand is that as federal public land agencies, our job is to protect water and air and land. It's not just protecting hiking trails for recreationists. Like, we're literally protecting the water table. We're making sure that we have clean water in the country. Having millions of acres of public land is one of the most unique things about this country. Um, Having federally protected public lands, that it does take an act of Congress to make any changes in those lands. They can't just be bought and sold to the highest bidder for whatever that might look like. You can't just go out and build factories on federal public lands because it's there to protect our air and water. Everyone in the country, even on the East Coast, like, I feel like a lot of people kind of write off wildfires, or they have historically, like, oh, that's a Western problem, that's a California problem. It's like, no, that these things affect everybody in very different ways. And yeah, you're starting to see more fires now in the Midwest and the East and the Southeast just in the last few years, and it's finally starting to open people's eyes up in a different way. It's like, oh wait, this isn't just California. We don't get to just see California on the news and whatever. It's not a problem. Yeah, it's finally to a point where people are starting to get an idea of what happens with wildfires.
Yeah, people seem to learn at the very last moment when life kind of forces them to.
Totally.
But I saw, so the bill, obviously, as I was reading it, I saw that there was like specialized premium pay and what we talked about and lodging, all of that. With the, let's say the Paycheck Protection Act gets
Mhm.
passed.
Yeah.
So how would that impact? Do you think it would help with hiring? Do you think it would help with employee retention?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a huge part of why we're making all these big pushes to get that passed, trying to elevate it to the highest levels. Because yeah, we're having a huge problem with retention. As I've mentioned multiple times already, like people have been leaving at pretty terrifying rates from the federal fire world. Um, Sorry, I'm kind of losing my train of thought here,
Sure,
but
yeah.
yeah, yeah, basically, yeah, it would help with retention. Yeah, it would just help everything across the board because we talk about retention as one of our main issues we deal with all the time. So if we can at least tell people like, hey, everyone's guaranteed to make at least 15 an hour, but then these are the raises that we've gotten, because of this bill. Again, it's literally it's not a $20,000 raise across the board with the new bill, but it's still close to that. It's, depending on what your GS level is, government pay scale level is. Yeah, I'm going to be making close to 50% more. So yeah, yeah, we need something. Like this is kind of if we don't get this um, soon, I don't know. It's kind of a question in everybody's mind. Like, how long do we hold on? Like, how long do we stick with all these agencies? Because yeah, we need someone to look out for us. But again, that's where, yeah, to get in the advocacy piece a little more, like working with the union, the National Federation of Federal Employees, and then the organization Grassroots Wildland Firefighters. There's a pretty small group of people around the country that are doing a lot of work to make sure that these legislation that this legislation is being brought up to the levels that are needed. I mean, there are people from both organizations in DC, I'd say on a weekly basis at this point. There's somebody there walking around talking to representatives every week that either are still our current wildland firefighters or have retired or resigned and now are doing this because they want to help people going forward. Yeah.
How can people like myself that aren't involved in this, is there anything we can do on our end to help move things along? Or what do you suggest people that want to help? What should they do?
Yeah, totally. So just back to those two organizations, NIFI, can check out both of their websites. They both have amazing tools to just kind of get you into how to contact representatives. A lot of people I've figured out just don't understand how easy that actually is. And it's not this big, intimidating thing. Like you call your senator, you're going to talk to a staffer more than likely. You might actually talk to a representative, but that's not extremely likely. But you're basically just leaving a quick note, a message with them saying, hey, I want you to support the WFPPA, support the Wildland Firefighter Paycheck Protection Act. I care about fire, whatever. You can say whatever you want, but it's literally, it can be a 30-second call. And just watching staffers actually do this sitting in the office this summer, like, oh man, this is wild how simple this is and how direct. Like it's beneficial. I feel like people don't um, think that calling or writing their representatives matters, but if 5 people or if 10 people call in a day, they're taking tallies, they're making notes of that stuff, and they're like, wow, 13 people have called about the Paycheck Protection Act today. We should probably look into this. So they're going to talk to another staffer and they're going to elevate that up to the representative. Like, hey, everyone's calling about this firefighter bill. What can we do about it? Can we get together with other representatives? So yeah, without getting into all that too much, calling and writing is a really, really good way to just let people know that yeah, wildland fire needs to be supported in a more significant way. And that's, I mean, especially if you're in a wildland fire prone area. But again, it's becoming an issue for people everywhere. But yeah, there's websites. There's NIFE.org, it's NFFE.org, and then grassrootswildlandfirefighters.com. Yeah, both those websites have a huge amount of information as far as how you can help. There it's, yeah, writing to people, donating money. Yeah, there's a lot of ways to help out through those avenues.
Amazing. And I'm going to link all of that in the show notes so people can go to it pretty easily.
Cool. Thanks.
So, do you have any fire prevention safety tips to give people?
Oh man. Um, yeah, I mean, coming from California, like I said, I started there, started my career there. So it's a very different scenario there than a lot of places. And yeah, it's kind of basic stuff. Just be smart about what you're doing when you're doing things. If you're having campfires during a windstorm, maybe you shouldn't be having a fire. It's a lot of very basic stuff. Yeah, I don't know. Arson is a wild thing in California compared to other places. That's hard for me to even wrap my head around. But yeah, just paying attention to what you're doing. Campfires are definitely a big one in California specifically. So yeah, I don't want to give the cheesy spiel, but it's like, yeah, dump a bunch of water on a fire when you leave it. Don't leave a smoldering fire all day. Fires do actually start that way. So you have a campfire overnight and leave it burning all night and then leave the next day. It just sits there and burns until somebody does something about it. So,
It seems like common sense, but you'd be surprised
yeah,
how much I think people do actually need to hear that because they were
yeah.
saying, I mean, at this point, while we're recording, there's no definitive answer to how the Palisades fire started. But one of the theories that I've been hearing, aside from the people who are, crying arson, are saying that there was a fire in that exact origin spot over New Year's from fireworks, and that maybe, just maybe, it didn't go out enough and that it was
Mhm.
burning under the ground, which, like, I hadn't even thought fire goes underground and burns roots that we can't even see because it doesn't feel like just an intuitively obvious thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, making sure something that when it's smoldering, knowing that that's still very much hazardous.
Hmm. Yeah, totally. There's a lot to think
Yeah,
about.
it is. And then how should people act if there is a fire emergency? Like what should they be thinking about first?
I mean, your personal safety is the most important thing. So getting out of the way, if it, I mean, yeah, depending on the scale, if it's something very small and you can deal with a campfire, putting out a campfire, but yeah, taking care of yourself before you do anything and then calling 911, getting resources there as fast as possible. Don't run away without calling someone. Don't assume that someone else is going to call 911, I guess. That's one thing that definitely seen and heard about over the years is people drive by fires and see it and like, well, there's 100 other people around. Someone must have called. That's crazy, but and yeah, there are times where fires go unreported for hours or an hour, and yeah, if you can make a little bit of a difference there just by yeah calling it in, pretty straightforward.
And then is there anything that you want people to know about wildland firefighting that I didn't ask you today?
Um, this and on a positive note, yeah, as much kind of intensity and doom and gloom as there is right now. We talk about our fire family all the time. It's an amazing group of people. We come together from all different backgrounds. beliefs, political beliefs, whatever, and we come together to do a very specific job, and we can kind of put all the noise to the side, and we just get together and yeah, work as a really yeah, really efficient, highly motivated crew and team of people to get a lot of good work done. So yeah, it's a we're all a big family. It's a pretty cool thing to see how small the wildland fire community actually is when you start going on fires in different states and you've been around for a few years. You run into people in the most random places in the middle of the night on a fire that you haven't seen in a few years. So yeah, just that whole family aspect is pretty amazing.
I love that so much. Well, thank you for joining me, Chris Hensley. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Other than the two websites that you alluded to that I'll put in the show notes, is there anything else people should know about ways to support you?
I'd say that's it. Not to get people bogged down. Those are both great starting points, and then you can go a bunch of different ways from there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for talking to me today, and thank you everybody for listening.
Doris, thanks, Galena.